Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's B-E-A-T. IRS, defending freedom since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We have online with us Matt Barber. Matt Barber is the founder and editor-in-chief of barbedwire.com. He's also a law professor. He's an attorney that concentrates in constitutional law. He also holds a Master of Arts in Public Policy from Regent University. We've, of course, had some of his columns at Restoring Liberty, one of which covered the Kim Davis event recently. He's also written for WorldNet Daily, The Blaze, Washington Times, Town Hall, and he also has experience in radio. He hosts the Faith and Freedom, a daily legal and cultural issues talks radio program, which is heard on 90 stations nationwide. Matt Barber, it's an honor to have you on our program. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's an honor to be on. Thanks, Joe.
So, Matt, let's talk about the Kim Davis thing. One of the things that really disappointed me is that at the beginning of this whole thing, one of the big issues, beyond the fact that a Republican judge put her in jail, beyond the fact that, of course, nobody seemed to really pay attention to constitutional principle, is the fact that in the Republican field, hardly anybody really supported her the way they should. Of course, Huckabee, Cruz, notable exceptions. What about the rest of the field, and what's your explanation?
Well, yeah, there were a handful. I mean, you had Bobby Jindal, you had Mike Huckabee, you had Ted Cruz, and a handful of others come to the defense of this woman who is simply asking for a reasonable, simple accommodation so that she does not have to violate her conscience in issuing these so-called same-sex marriage licenses that have been foisted on America by 5 radical left-wing extremist lawyers in Washington, D.C., with this Supreme Court decision that somehow divined a magical right for Patrick Henry to marry Henry Patrick. And so it was disappointing that so few of them came to her defense. And I'll tell you why. It's because the homosexual activist left and other cultural Marxists, so-called progressives, have done such a masterful job of smearing and labeling anybody who will not capitulate to every demand of the homosexual activist lobby, smearing them as haters and bigots and homophobes, that they have created this third rail of politics on the gay marriage issue. And just a few short years ago, as you know, this was overwhelmingly a winner. People recognized, as does every major world religion, thousands of years of history and uncompromising human biology, that marriage is, as it has always been, and that is between male, female, that there's that necessary binary proponent. So we are living in the twilight zone in this day and age where these cowardly establishment Republicans and these squishes, these rhino squishes that make up the majority of this rat pack of GOPers running for the White House, that they're just gutless. They're utterly gutless. And here this woman is simply trying to exercise her First Amendment guaranteed religious liberties, not be forced under penalty of law to violate her conscience and put her stamp of approval that on something for Christians is expressly sin-centered. Homosexual marriage is sin-based and sin-centered if you are a faithful, practicing Christian.
Yeah, and you called the reaction gutless for the most part. And yet you've got folk like Trump, who's not really known as a gutless guy. I mean, he gets out there and says it like it is for the most part, not always. And, of course, I'm talking about the recent past, not the 3 or 4 years past, where he obviously was on the opposite side of many issues he's on now. But, I mean, Trump, Carly Fiorina, and others made statements that were unequivocally against what Kim Davis did.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder whether it's simply because they're uninformed or if it's because they're putting their finger to the wind and thinking, it's going to be a liability if I come to this woman's defense. For Carly Fiorina, I think she's smarter than that, has more knowledge of politics and the Constitution. I think she made a calculated political cost-benefit analysis and decided to throw this woman under the bus, Kim Davis. With Donald Trump, I don't think Donald Trump knows what Donald Trump thinks. I think he's looking for a fight, and he's always ready to bristle and puff up his chest. And don't get me wrong, I find it endearing. I like that Donald Trump, for instance, is willing to lock horns and walk out the victor more often than not against the mainstream media. I think it's delightful. I love it. I just personally, Donald Trump is no conservative. He's a big government liberal, and certainly on the social issues when it comes to to gay marriage and other things, and his long storied history of supporting abortion and Planned Parenthood, which that hasn't changed in terms of supporting Planned Parenthood. I just think Donald Trump is just kind of all over the map on any number of issues.
Did Jeb Bush ever make a statement with respect to Kim Davis and his position on what she did?
Not that I have seen. To my knowledge, he's kind of avoided this one like the plague. He's known to have one of his primary staffers is an open homosexual, and I can't think of the fellow's name. This is one of his top staffers, who and not just an open homosexual, but a very active homosexual activist. And Jeb Bush has indicated he's one of the few that have said this. After the High Court came down with this ridiculous decision in Obergefell. Jeb Bush said, "Well, it's the law of the land. We have to recognize it now." And since when, I'd like to know, does any court make laws? That's for the legislature. The Supreme Court is to interpret laws, and certainly the Supreme Court is supreme over the judicial branch of government. But as you know all too well, Joe, our founding fathers were clear that the judicial branch of government, if anything, was to be the weakest branch of government. And as it stands now, the myth of judicial supremacy has us in a place that we are living under judicial tyranny, effectively. We are not ruled and not living under a constitutional Republican form of government. We are living under a judiciocracy wherein, the majority of 9 black-robed autocrats, could be 5 in this case, basically rule from on high. It's an oligarchy, and that is not our form of government. That's not how it was intended. And the vast majority of our founding fathers warned, Thomas Jefferson most prevalently warned, that this day could come, and Jefferson's nightmare has arrived.
It amazes me that hardly anybody in positions of authority is sounding the alarm over this issue. But it's very commonsensical. I mean, you have no parameters, no limits, nothing that bounds in the judiciary when somebody like Anthony Kennedy can go and say, look, the Constitution doesn't say anything about this. It needs to be there. Therefore, I decree it. And that is something that ought to shock everybody to their very core, especially, when you're talking about what that supplants then. I mean, you had 30-plus states. I mean, Alabama, 80% plus against gay marriage, and yet the court says that they can go in and do this on this particular issue. What issues are left outside of their scope of action? None. That's my perspective.
Well, you're exactly right, and that's how it's played out, and that's exactly what the 4 dissenting justices had to say. Chief Justice Roberts saying, hey, don't look to the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it. Don't look to our history. Don't look to our public policy. Don't look to any court precedent or any case precedent. Don't look to any kind of substantial or substantive 14th Amendment analysis here, because it's simply not there. This is Justice Kennedy living by his doctrine that, hey, we get to all be the masters of our fate. Whatever our interpretation of the universe is, that's how it's going to be. And, this is moral relativism on display. And if the Constitution is whatever the judges say the Constitution is, then the Constitution is nothing at all.
And then looking at the illegitimate nature of the decision with 2 justices who actually were involved in gay marriages. I used to be a U.S. magistrate judge. Under the Code of Judicial Conduct, these folk don't even seem to care about those limits either. I'll tell you, Anthony Kennedy also, of course, has a history in that area. We'll talk more about that, other issues along with Matt Barber, founder and editor-in-chief of barbwire.com, an attorney focusing on constitutional law, and also a law professor. Back after these messages. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have Matt Barber with us. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of barbwire.com. He is no stranger to talk radio. He's heard of it on about 90 stations nationwide. Faith and Freedom, a daily legal and cultural issues talk radio program. He's also a law professor. Constitutional law is his specialty. And he's very much active in the culture wars. Matt, thank you for staying with us for another segment.
You got it.
One of the things we're talking about during the break is how this Kim Davis thing has kind of spawned perhaps an activism that's focused on civil disobedience. In Anchorage, we have pending, and we just had on this program yesterday, the head of Alaska Family Council, talking about how likely an ordinance will be passed in the not-so-distant future, maybe even tonight, which basically compels all people of faith, if they have a business, they'll have to hire a transvestite, a homosexual. If they have a bed and breakfast, they'll be compelled to allow them to come and sleep in the beds in their home. If they have a business that operates according to Christian principle, and they even have a code of conduct and or a statement of principles that these people that come in and try to create disruption violate by either their own dress or their lifestyles, this ordinance says you've got to comply. And, of course, this is a violation of conscience for each one of these people that really do have these deeply held views. It's leading to some serious ramifications for Christians nationwide. Of course, you've heard of the baker, photographer, flower shop arrangers. I mean, people all across this nation are under the gun. In Oregon, of course, $135,000 judgment. People are being bankrupted. What do you think ought to be done? What is going to be forced upon the Christian community in this nation if things continue?
Well, listen, I am among many who have for a long time been saying that this whole idea of so-called gay marriage, that these sexual orientation laws, basically all of these radical agenda items that have been pushed by these homosexual pressure groups are really designed not so much to, for instance, so that two homosexual men can get married. I often say they don't want the white picket fence; they want to burn down the white picket fence. But more importantly, all of these issues are being used as a hammer, and this is by design, on religious freedom. The target here is Christ, is Christianity, and is the free exercise of religion. They are pushing this radical agenda in order to silence all dissent. And I have a word for this. And these are strong words that I'm using here, but people are seeing it happen across the country. We are there. We are no longer under threat of what I call homo-fascism. We are living under homo-fascism. This radical agenda, as we just saw a woman we were talking about last segment, Kim Davis, for refusing to violate her conscience for the first time in American history, at least that I'm aware of. This woman was thrown in jail for exercising her faith for nearly a week, and we are going to see a whole lot more of that. So I wrote an article right after the High Court came down with this decision on gay marriage, saying that it is time for civil disobedience for Christians. Civil disobedience is not something that we should take lightly. Martin Luther King Jr. did not take civil disobedience lightly. And he said, and I'll paraphrase, he said that we have a duty to obey just laws. We have a responsibility to do so, but we also have a duty and obligation to disobey unjust laws. And he defined unjust laws as laws that are contrary to God's law. Those were his exact words, that run afoul of natural law. So now we have this newfangled notion of so-called gay rights, something that during our colonial period, sodomy was called a crime against nature, and in all of the 13 colonies, most of them at least, was punishable by death. Of course, I'm not advocating that, but that's the reality of how it was. That somehow that is now a sacrosanct right that trumps, mind you, the First Amendment, the express rights of free exercise of religion, of freedom of speech, and so forth. Our founding fathers are rolling over in their graves that we have come to now where sexually deviant behavior and those who define their identity based upon those behaviors are now able to force, under penalty of law, with threat of jail now, and certainly people losing their businesses and so forth, force them to assent to and even celebrate, affirm behaviors that are expressly throughout both the Old and the New Testaments called sin, and that is not George Washington's America. That is Joseph Stalin's Russia.
Yeah, and it's reaching a point that a lot of people are looking at this and saying, okay, what is the future going to hold for us, our families? Is it going to continue in this direction? Have we lost the battle of education? Are we at a point now where this is just simply self-protective, or is there still an opportunity to convince people? Now, you mentioned this earlier, just recently, I mean, as recent as 2 or 3 years ago, almost all the polling data out there suggested that the vast majority of Americans were against gay marriage. There's been a radical shift in opinion in many states since then to where people believe that we have just gone inexorably in this direction of an anything-goes type morality. Do you think it's too late late, or do you think there's still opportunity to convince the people of this country that we've got to go a different direction?
No, I don't believe it's too late. In fact, I think this is the genesis of the next great awakening. I still have hope for America. I think that a revolution is at hand, not an armed revolution necessarily as of yet, but that a revolution is at hand. And we saw what one woman in little Rowan County, Kentucky, was able to do by simply standing her ground and saying, no, I will not disobey God. I will not violate my conscience. Throw me in jail if you must. And we saw the backlash, the tremendous backlash. They meant to make an example of her, and instead they made a martyr of her and riled up a nation. Imagine, if the folks in Anchorage, parents marched on the school district or marched on, and said no. The baker, the florist, the innkeeper, and they said no. This is a violation of our conscience. We will not comply with this unjust law. You can come throw me in jail. You can fine me. I will not pay the fine. And then go, call Liberty Counsel, call the Alliance Defending Freedom, and say, look, here's what they're trying to force me to do. I refuse to do it. And when we have just even a handful of courageous people who are willing to disobey unjust edicts that run afoul of our United States Constitution, we have a rich history in this nation of doing that, and that is how social change occurs. They call it social progress. These are regressives, not progressives. And if we're going to have actual progress in this nation, or at least reform, getting back to and revival in this nation, people are going to have to wake up and say, you know what? The tyranny is over. It's coming to an end. We are standing up against it.
And the beauty of this is that when people do stand up, like Kim Davis did, the feds almost always back down. And that's effectively what this judge did. And it kind of reminded me of what happened at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada. Cliven Bundy, they decided, hey, right or wrong, he stood up to it with a lot of other people, and the feds backed down. And there's a lot of speculation as to why they did there. But the short of it is this, and we mentioned this during the break, and that is that the federal government's very powerful. It's increasing its power largely because of an out-of-control Supreme Court that continues to misapply the Constitution. But the reality is most government is state and local, so the feds really don't have the agency necessary to implement the type of tyranny that they might want or that many in the federal government might want. And I really believe that the more we push back, whether it be the March on the School, whether it be parents saying, absolutely not, we're not going to subject our children to an any-sex locker room, which is coming, believe it or not, it's actually going on now in Anchorage, Alaska.
It's all over the country, yeah.
Oh, it's just crazy. Yeah. I mean, it is just insane. It's insanity released, and it's by a very limited few that have a willing judiciary that's helping implement what they want, and it's something that we've got to stop. So I think you're straight on in saying civil disobedience is the way to go. So are there plenty of lawyers standing by to help out people that decide that they're going to not submit to these unjust laws?
Oh, absolutely. And it's obviously a case-by-case basis, and they're looking. But, yeah, people need to be emboldened. People need to be encouraged and understand that, there are a number of religious liberty law firms. I've worked with Liberty Counsel and Matt Staver, who is Kim Davis's attorney, for a number of years. This is what we're looking for. And look, again, what one woman did, Judge David Bunning, he walked back. He didn't just walk back his contempt of court ruling. He ran it back. He released her from jail with no assurance, no promise. She didn't change anything. She still hasn't changed anything. She said she's still not going to violate her conscience. He let her out of jail because of the Martin Luther King Jr. comparisons, because of the Rosa Parks comparisons, because any reasonable person around the country sat there and looked at that and went, wait a minute, whether they agree with her or not on the issue of gay marriage, saying, wait a minute, she's being thrown in jail because she will not violate her conscience. As with Rosa Parks, she shook a nation. Kim Davis has shaken a nation, and it's amazing what one person, again, who will stand firm on their principle and refuse to violate their conscience, what they can accomplish.
And keep in mind, if there are any listeners out here that think this is just a real extreme discussion, they need to read the dissents and the Obergefell decision. I mean, Scalia was just scathing. In fact, some have characterized his dissent as being the most inflammatory ever. One of the statements he made, I just pulled it up here. This is what Scalia contended that Kennedy's decision did. He said it robbed the people of the most important liberty they asserted in the Declaration of Independence and won in the Revolution of 1776, the freedom to govern themselves. And he made other statements that were really at their core revolutionary in character, objecting to what happened. I mean, the first time we have a decision at the Supreme Court level that compels action to violate conscience, unlike, what we said, Roe v. Wade, horrible decision, Roe v. Wade. I mean, we've had almost 60 million slaughtered in this country as a consequence of what happened there, but it doesn't positively require you to go out and violate conscience. In this particular case, you can be compelled to go out there and either go to jail or violate conscience. It's something that I think many are going to look at as being a catalyst to action.
Oh, there's no question about it, and it already is. Just in 2 short months. I mean, it has blown up. It has blown up a nation in terms of what we see happening with this gay marriage juggernaut. And for Justice Scalia, to invoke the language of this is of the Revolutionary War. This isn't Joe Miller and Matt Barber. This this isn't some militia group in Montana. This is Justice Antonin Scalia saying that this robbed Americans of their constitutional liberties and is akin to that type of affront to liberty that led to the Revolutionary War. Are you kidding me? And then you have Justice Alito effectively saying that this decision is effectively illegitimate, calling it illegitimate. I have never seen more scathing dissents in any Supreme Court decision.
Well, we, I think, have a responsibility to stand up and say no. Certainly those of us who have a mouthpiece have got to continue to stand up and say, despite whatever risk there might be, and believe you me, I mean, Matt, you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. Just had somebody on the program yesterday suggesting the professional licenses are going to be at risk. That's the next step to try to strip people of their ability to influence the process. And I would imagine that you're probably right on the edge of that. Are you aware of anybody yet that is a member of a bar of any state that has been threatened with disciplinary action because of a refusal relating to some sort of homosexual mandate or transvestite mandate?
Not yet, but it's coming. Believe me, Joe. I'm licensed, and I've long understood that I'm probably not going to hang on to that license forever. In some states, Florida, I think, a number of states around the country, they effectively make you sign off on a guarantee that they use all their flowery language of tolerance and diversity and non-discrimination and so forth, but basically sign off on the fact that you will not oppose the homosexual activist political agenda. And it's coming. It's coming. But again, that's why we need to nip it in the bud. This homosexual activist juggernaut, this larger progressive juggernaut, cultural Marxism needs to be stopped in its tracks, and it needs to be stopped now.
And I call them the gay stop you. You call it the homo-fascist. But the gay stop you is out there. They're not just trying to make sure that they can do what they want to do, but they want to get their pound of flesh. It's all about punishment, grinding people into the dirt that disagree with them. We got to make sure that we make our stand, because if not, tomorrow we're going to wake up stripped of everything we have, bankrupt, and probably in jail. Matt, appreciate your fight that you've undertaken to help defend religious freedom. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. You too, brother. God bless.
God bless you. Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show, right back after these messages.